Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Daniel Carvalho will defend the academic thesis Lock and Play, Reversible Union between Organoids and Organs on Chip. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Dear Prorector, dear Corona members, family and friends, thank you for being here. In the next 15 minutes, I will be presenting the research conducted over the last 4 years, which led to the conclusion of this PhD thesis. Over the last decades, human civilization has made remarkable advances. However, at the cost of a fast-growing chemical industry and other polluting anthropogenic activities, which have brought profound changes and impacts to our ecosystems and also to the public health. As a consequence, today's society is continuously exposed to a multitude of toxic and synthetic chemicals. Some of these chemicals, they can disrupt the normal functioning of our endocrine system. They are known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, or in short, EDCs. And the endocrine system is a very important part of our human body. It regulates the growth, metabolism, and development. And one main constituent of this system is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is composed of multiple thyroid follicles, which are responsible for the production and secretion of the thyroid hormones T4 and T3. And these hormones are very important to regulate various crucial physiological processes. And when the thyroid gland is exposed to EDCs, studies have shown that they can disrupt the production and synthesis of the T4 hormones. As a consequence, growing evidence has been shown that EDC exposure is associated to the increased prevalence of different chronic diseases, including hormone-related cancers, reproductive and neural disorders, obesity, and cardiovascular diseases. To make it worse, on top of these, EDCs are spread everywhere. They are in the air that we breathe. They are in daily products that we make contact with every day, including food containers, plasticizers, our coffee mugs, our clothes, in cosmetics and electronics. Despite these urgencies, EDC exposure is increasing. And that's mainly because current toxicological assays fail to predict whether a new chemical going into the market can act as an endocrine disruptor. And this is primarily due to the fact that up to this day, they are still based on 2D cell cultures and animal models. 2D cell cultures, they fail to replicate the complexity of the human thyroid organ in vitro. They are very simplistic. On the other side, animal models, they do bring the complexity of the thyroid, but in the wrong species, not human. Therefore, currently, there is an urgent need to develop new superior thyroid models in vitro so that we can translate them into screening assays that can accurately predict thyroid disruption. So that was the aim of this PhD thesis. And how we do this? Well, recently, two very different strategies have emerged in the field. One is organs on a chip, which are these microengineered environments where we integrate very simplistic cell cultures and we try to control the environment that we provide with the cells. And importantly, we can also apply a blood-like perfusion, like blood flow. On the contrary, organoids are these 3D, exceptional 3D mini organ-like structures that replicate the key anatomical and physiological features of the thyroid gland. So this is spectacular. However, it comes at the cost of a high variability. It's very difficult to control the growth and the functionality of these organoids in vitro. While they are very different from each other, they can address each other's limitations. So recently, to create an even superior model, there is the strategy of synergetically combining both the organoids and organs on a chip, so that organoids can bring the complexity of the human thyroid, while the organs on a chip can bring the controllability to control the variability of the organoids. So we follow this approach. And in chapter 2, we started by identifying that the combination of organoids on chip is rather difficult. This is mainly because traditional microfluidic chips, they were designed to incorporate very simplistic cell cultures, and they are not adapted for some of the largest and more complex organoid models. And this is mainly because they are often irreversibly bonded, so they have a permanent seal. We don't have direct internal access to the cell chambers, which makes very complicated the incorporation, manipulation, and characterization of organoids or other big 3D constructs on chip. Therefore, to address these issues, these challenges, we reintroduced clamping strategies as tools to facilitate the combination of organoids on chip. By using clamps, we can open and close the device whenever we want without damaging the chip, and so we have direct access, and this facilitates the loading and unloading of organoids from the chip. Ultimately, we introduced in the literature a new term called lock and play, in short LNP, which describes any clamp that can, in a very easy way, open and close the device whenever we want, in a similar way that we find in many examples in nature, like clams or oysters. So these are very easy to use, and they find tremendous applications for high-throughput screenings and for the industry. In Chapter 3, we develop our first organoid on a chip design. For that, we incorporated mouse embryonic stem cell-derived thyroid follicles with our own microfluidic chip. This device was composed of a membranous carrier, here highlighted in green in this picture, where we culture the organoids, the mouse-derived organoids. And then this membrane was inserted between two silicon gaskets and enclosed in a polycarbonate housing. It was leak tight by a set of 6 screws. One of the key innovations of this design was the use of the membranous carrier. By using our in-house polymer film technology, we were able to create different patterns and geometries in these carriers. For example, we could design a simple tray where we could load gel-embedded cell culture, or we could replicate an array of microwells. When organoids are cultured on these microwells, they will individually be confined into each microwell, thus being very well distributed over the carrier and, in theory, reducing the variability between the devices. With this microfluidic chip, we expose organoids up to 4 days under perfusion. And what we observed was that the thyroid follicles, the thyroid organoids, not only maintain the 3D characteristic structure of the thyroid in vitro, but also the expression of key thyroid genes, including thyroglobulin, which is the precursor of the thyroid hormone. And more importantly, when we compare to static controls, so organized culture in a Petri dish, we observe a higher proportion of T4 producing organoids, indicating that our device, the addition of flow, can enhance the functionality of the thyroid in vitro. In the next chapter, we aim to further study the effects of flow in thyroid functionality, but now using human cells, so increasing the physiological relevance of the model. We culture human embryonic stem cell-derived thyroid organoids in the same device, and immunohistostainings against expression of T4 showed again, comparing to static controls, that we only had T4, the thyroid hormone production, in the follicles in the organoids culture in our device, thus indicating that the addition of flow can improve the functionality of the thyroid. Next, we aim to determine whether this improved functionality would also lead to improvability to replicate thyroid responses to EDCs. So we exposed the thyroid organoids to a well-known EDC, BKF, which originates from the combustion of fossil fuels. And what we observed after 7 days exposed to BKF was that BKF exposure completely abolished T4 production, both in static and in our perfused model. And more importantly, BKF exposure caused 4 times more changes in gene expression in our device when compared to static controls, indicating that by using our device, we can have a more pronounced, more informative response to EDCs. After establishing our thyroid model in vitro, we aim at upscaling our system to create a screening platform capable of analyzing multiple EDCs at the same time. So in chapter 5, we started by selecting 16 different EDCs across 4 different classes: PBCs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, phthalates, and flame retardants. And we developed another organoid on a chip design. This was based on our own lock and play principle. So this was a very simple tapped microfluidic body where we incorporated multiple fluidic compartments and the membranous carrier vertically aligned inside this tapped body. And then on top, we screwed with a reversible cap, which was able to leak tight up to 3 independent cell culture chambers, thus increasing the throughput and reducing time and resources. After exposure to the different EDCs for 24 hours or 10 days, we've easily opened the different chips, and we were able to, in a very efficient way, to remove enough cell material to perform multiple downstream analyses, including transcriptomics and proteomics to assess changes at gene and protein levels. What we observed was that polyaromatic hydrocarbons and PCBs had a strong impact at gene and protein levels, respectively. We also identified various class effects and potential universal signatures that should be further studied. And importantly, we also detected that thyroid dysregulation can happen even at very low doses of EDCs, equivalent to the daily human exposure levels. So after conducting these experiments, and although this platform was quite successful in screening multiple EDCs, as you can see in this picture, the amount of tubing that we used was quite challenging. So we needed a lot of people, up to 2 to 3 operators at the same time. It was very time consuming to do this, and these aspects are not very good to translate this platform into the industry. We need to make it simple. Therefore, in the next and final technical chapter, we decided to remove tubing out of the equation, and for that, we did our own Lego-like microfluidic platform. This was based on a fluidic circuit board concept. Basically, we developed this platform that had embedded microfluidic channels connecting different Lego-like cell culture modules. These could be reservoirs, could be organs on a chip with our own lock and play design, or even sensor modules. We tested these for 10 days under perfusion. And here you can see that we plugged into 6 platforms, reservoirs, sensor module for monitoring the levels of oxygen and pH of the culture, and organs on a chip with the thyroid. What we observed was that after 10 days, the organoids were quite happy. They maintained their 3D structure and the expression of key thyroid genes, including thyroid globulin. And more importantly, when we compared to the previous platforms of the other chapters, this platform was able to substantially decrease the amount of time needed to assemble the different components. In conclusion, in chapter 2, we determined that reversible sealing is a good alternative to facilitate combination of organoids with organs on a chip. In chapter 3 and 4, we determined that flow can enhance the functionality of both mouse and human thyroid organoids. Chapter 5, we saw that we performed successfully the screening of multiple EDCs using a single platform. Here, we also determined that tubing is a major limiting factor, and we can solve that using novel modular tubeless platforms so that it can reduce the complexity and bring more flexibility to the platforms. Now, I give the hand to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will now start with the opposition, and the opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee, Professor van Griensven, Professor of Regenerative Medicine at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector. Dear candidate, thank you for this very nice book. First of all, I like really the cover picture you have, and second of all, I read it with great interest. I'm not a person that makes this kind of chips, and you make it, but I like what you put in, because that's really something that is what interests me. And that's also what I want to discuss with you about. So when we go to chapter 3, you take your chip, your organoid on a chip, and you use T4 for measuring your outcome. However, as you also said nicely in your presentation, the thyroid is not only making T4 but also T3. So why you only measured T4 and not T4 and T3 and the ratio thereof?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words. We initially, so the thyroid model was established by our collaborators, and the functionality, the ultimate functionality of the thyroid, they set up a protocol to identify T4, and these could be done by radioactive assays. But they also developed protocols by using antibodies against the expression of T4. And therefore, we took over the same protocols, and we started by measuring T4, although recently we also quantified quantitatively T4 and T3 by mass spec, which gives us a bit more reliable results, let's say, because it was very difficult to image T4. It's always qualitative when we go by imaging methods. But indeed, T3, it's the active form.
Exactly.
Yeah, the active form, and it's highly valuable also to get those results. And
and when you then see in your model, so you really rely on what is produced in there in real life. You also have like the pituitary gland that is going with TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, also to then revert again what is happening in there. So have you any plans of also getting these feedback loops in there?
Yeah, it would be great. I think we also, although we had to keep simple, it would be great to replicate the HPT axis on a chip. So we could have the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the thyroid.
Yeah, absolutely.
And see indeed this homeostasis of the regulation of the different hormones. We use kind of CMP to stimulate the thyroid to produce, well, to create the follicles, first instance, but also to promote the production of T4 and T3. What we also know is that we use matrigel, and later on, after some time working with matrigel and some research that we observed, we saw that there was certain hormones that were kind of inhibit also T4 and T3 production. So that's something to take into account, that maybe we have that feedback, the negative feedback control loops already in the matrix that we are culturing the organoids onto.
Very nice. When you then look at your experiment where you expose it to EDC, you see that you have like 18 differentially expressed genes in the 2D and 7 overlapping in the 3D. So there's a difference. And what did you make out of that? So do you think that the 3D is much better because it's less genes? And how can you be sure that your component is really inducing a thyroid toxicity?
Yes. So we have good confidence that the compound is being perceived by the thyroid follicles in our device, because BKF is known to activate the AHR pathway. And so we observed upregulation of CYP1A1 and CYP1B1, which indicates that this pathway that it's very specific for response to xenobiotics, including polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which BKF is one of them. So we are, that showed us with some great confidence that indeed it's being perceived, it's being received by the cells, and the cells are responding to it. Now, the comparison that we did with 2D and 3D, we have to be a bit careful with it. That's why we put in the supplementary, because this was done in 2 different experiments done at different times. And one thing that I learned in this thesis is that, variability in organoids is, it's something that it's there. So I wouldn't compare straightforward that 3D causes a more pronounced response based on the number of differentially expressed genes. That's something, if we want to really be sure of it, we should set up an experiment where both are done at the same time, using the same batch. However, this might indicate that it's worth to try. But at the same time, we have to investigate what are the pathways activated and get a bit more mechanistic understanding underlying that differentially expression of the genes.
With that, I would like to go to chapter 4, because there you actually also did similar experiments. And there you then see actually, there you used another perfusion. You just doubled the perfusion rate of 25 instead of 12. And so you get also there some effects. You see that the size is very similar of your organoids, but how do you interpret then differences in compound toxicity?
So comparing in terms of the different time points. In chapter 4 we did for 7 days. And for the other one, 24 hours. Yeah,
I wanted actually to go to the difference in your fluid rate, because you have 12 and 25.
So the difference between the flow rates, it was mainly based on the fact that in chapter 3 we used mouse, and in chapter 4 we did human. So I tried to kind of copy a bit the residence time of the blood-like flow on chip. And because for the human, the data that is available shows a residence time lower, I think around 23 seconds, then the flow rate has to be higher, while in the mouse it's around 3 minutes, then the flow rate has to be lower. So that was the main reason behind it. But it would be great, and although we did kind of a comparison study at different flow rates, but we did it in the lab with different organoids. And with gut organoids, we did that, so compare the effects of flow at different rates. And that's always a good study to perform.
Then a very last short question of chapter 5. When you then did all your compound testing, you had then 4 classes, 16 compounds. When I look at figure 2, you really see actually it's all over the place. There's in one class you have different effects. How robust do you think is your system? And you have half of a minute of answering that.
It's a good question. This comes back to the variability and batch variability. So PCA analysis show us that the main variation was batch-to-batch variability. So if you really want to get conclusions, you really shouldn't compare polyaromatic hydrocarbons with PCBs, so between classes, because these were done at different times, at different weeks. But you can compare within the class, because they were done at the same time. But our positive control, MMI, also show us that using the same compound, the same protocol, it really gives different results. So indeed we have to be extremely careful, as we said in the discussion, because these are very complex models, and we are still not there. A lot has to be done yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I give back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor van Griensven. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Abalde Zela, who's present online. She is from the International Iberian Nanotechnology Laboratory in Braga, Portugal. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I think I feel there's no echo any longer. So dear candidate, first of all, congratulations on your presentation and on your dissertation. It was very clear, and I also enjoyed very much reading, and besides, I learned a lot. Also, my apologies for not being able to be present, but I am still enjoying, and I thank you for the flexibility. So let's start reflecting on the microfluidic fabrication and the choices that you've made from the beginning to the end, right? Starting with all the clamping and clamping, and then finishing with the legal. So I would just like to start talking with you, and you explain at different stages of your dissertation why you actually choose the clamping and unclamping. And if you could think, because I know it's got many, many advantages, as you've demonstrated, if you could think about ways of not using the clamping and clamping while being able to recover the organoids still. Because I imagine that the clamping and unclamping might have other downsides to further developments if you think about tech transfer, and we can go back to that later.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Just to be sure if I understood correctly, you mentioned why using polycarbonate in the device?
No, why would you choose clamping and unclamp, the clamping strategy?
Okay.
To remove the organoids, and can you think about other alternatives? Though I know you justified you've got great results. But that was the main reason, right? You have access to the organoids.
Yes, thank you. Now I understand. The clamping idea was based on the fact that we saw, for example, with 3D printed constructs, they are quite big. We can just simply flush them through very narrow microfluidic channels. Based on that idea, we also thought, okay, organoids are getting more complex and complex throughout these recent years, and having something that allows us to open the device and then just insert there the culture, then close it, apply the flow as a normal plasma-bounded PDMS chip, that would be a great thing to do. We also saw that there was some specific needs in the field. For example, when you use material culture, for example, sometimes because it's very small volumes, it can quickly solidify in the channels, so it can get a bit messy. Also, if you want to remove the cells after, normally you don't remove 100% of the cell material. Normally you have to do kind of lysis on chip or flush it with very high flow rates, or you even need to sacrifice the device so that you can retrieve your samples. So all those things we thought, okay, maybe using clamping strategies can actually be advantageous for this. Actually, it was a technology already used in the early beginnings of the field. We just try to bring it up again, and for this specific application. I think for body on a chip that also brings some advantages, because you can premature off-chip the different organs, either gut, pancreas, heart, and then once they are ready, we can just put them inside, close the device, and just go for it. Also, there is the advantages of having a larger spectrum of materials that we can select from. We can use thermoplastics, glass, yeah, it depends on the application, but those were the mainly advantages, let's say. Other methods than clamping, for example, I know there is this chemical bondings that you can use. Yeah, kind of glues that might be used as well. And there are studies that have shown that some can be reversible, these chemical glues that can be reversible. But yeah, it's something that I think still needs further research to develop and to be a bit more reliable and consistent as well.
I would personally go for the clamping still. Let me go along those lines. In the study that you did with the BKF exposure, where you've seen an increased production of the T4, how comparable is the flow in your devices to that of the human body in the thyroid region?
Can you repeat again?
Yes. So for the exposure with the BKF, you use specific flow, right? So I wanted to know these perfusion conditions, how similar are those to that in the human body?
So first, we use the peristaltic pump, at least in chapter 4. And there we have a kind of a pulsatile flow that kind of mimics a bit in the human body, how the heart beats. And also we try to match the residence time of the flow in our device, in our chips. We try to match those that happens in the human body. For chapter 4, we try to do that for the fœtal thyroid, so the early thyroid organ, because we were using early stage thyroid cells, and this was up to 23 seconds. So we tried to mimic that. Also, we had to normalize with the amount of thyroid follicles that we had, because we need a certain residence time, but normalize with the amount of follicles, because we had less follicles in the same amount of space than in the human. So probably they don't need that much flow going on compared in the human for the same volume. For chapter 3, using the mouse, we use the same principle. But here in the mouse, just to start, because it was the first experiments, we didn't use a pulsatile flow. It was a continuous unidirectional flow provided by the syringe pumps. So there is a bit more different than what happens in the human body or in the mouse. But then after each chapter, we try to get closer to what happens in the human.
Thank you. How are you sure that you're not overstimulating in your system your organoids, and that's why you get a higher concentration of T4 or expression of T4?
Indeed. So what we observed was that, for example, we determined that with the additional flow we can have higher T4, not a higher T4 production. Not only that, but when we did RNA sequencing, we determined also that we have upregulation of lipid catabolism. We had also more protein folding. So we had kind of overall, we had a more active thyroid. Because thyroid is known also when it's active to catabolize the lipids and to be a key player on the catabolism of lipids. So it was not only the production of T4, but also the highest protein folding, catabolism that was also upregulated. And those indicate that indeed, comparing to the static, we are kind of stimulating more the thyroid, at least that's what the results indicate, which can be advantageous, let's say, for a possible application. And it suggests that flow can be something that should be used to replicate thyroid in vitro.
Understood. Thank you very much. I don't know if I have another minute or...
No, I'm afraid your time is up. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the discussion. We continue with the next opponent, Professor Honing, Professor of Analytical Chemistry at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Mrs. Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, first of all, congratulations with pushing technologies into the new era. I would say a well-studied, perfect, systematic research. Well done for that, and also for the promoters in this case, great work has been done. And I liked also your presentation, although with the first slide I thought, well, it's obvious that it's strange that still I'm alive with 65 years. So with all this exposure, maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe it's a little bit less bad as you were picturing here. But engineers in general always have a pitfall, I would say, is over-promising their technology. So let's discuss that with a twist in the eye. So I like anyway the research you did. So don't let me misunderstood. So and you refer to experts, and I would advise you never to believe experts when they call themselves experts, because organ on a chip is going to save about €3 billion in the development of a drug, which is normally €10 billion. So what is the basis? What's the science behind that? Or are you just saying something others assume to be experts are saying? Because why did pharma not introduce it already 10 years ago then, if it's so much money?
Hello, esteemed opponent. Thank you for your question. It's a good question indeed. But so the organoid field and the organs on the chip, it's developing quite fast, and there is a lot of promising. And I think this is based on the costs of R&D for new chemicals.
But what is going to replace? What cost will be reduced then? €3 billion costs. What will be reduced? Chemicals?
I believe in the preclinical testing, I believe that will be the main saving that they can do. And also,
I can promise you it will not, but that's for later on. At the beer we will discuss that. I think it's a little bit overfetched, so watch out as a technologist, and then we can have a nice discussion. Now we go back to this nice first picture with all this smoke coming out of these chemical factories, and I'm not going to drink from any plastic cup anymore, that's for sure. And then you said also in your chapter 5 about 1 nanomolar. So what's the real exposure? Because you're measuring polyaromatic compounds. When they are in the environment, they stay there. They are not bioactive anyway. So what can you comment on the real exposure of these polyaromatic compounds? And then why did you choose 1 nanomolar? And especially, I'll come back to that, especially later on in your chapter 5, you claim that that is very important. But what about the exposure, real exposure?
Yes, that is something that we had a lot of difficulties because we know and the field knows that we have some adsorption and absorption of different compounds, especially, for example, if you use PDMS, for example, that is hydrophobic, the compounds can be hydrophobic. There can be some interaction that allows the compounds to stick there. We lose a bit the concentration and that reaches to the cell. So we actually don't know what is the effective.
Yeah, in pharma in general, the rule is that compounds with a log P and lipophilicity higher than 4, we call that lipophilic junk, is never coming into your body. So it's always interesting how people say there's exposure to polyaromates because they will not come into your body. But let's come back to that. I would like to ask one of your paranymphs to read proposition number 3.
EDC exposure can affect thyroid function at gene and protein levels, even at very low doses.
Yeah, I'm an analytical chemist. So what is very low?
So in the field, it's a bit, there is no big consensus about if EDCs can affect the thyroid at very low doses. So we were, in the beginning, the consortium, we were trying to set up, okay, what is a very low dose? It really depends. And we had to keep it simple because the project was already very complex because of the different EDCs that we had. We couldn't have a different concentration for the different chemicals because it would be quite tricky. So what we determined was to go with 1 nanomolar as mimicking the low dose and 10 micromolar as the highest dose.
Yeah, 10 micromolar is like shooting with a ship gun to some person and then being amazed that he dies. Yeah, that is a little bit over. But 1 nanomolar is very interesting because that's actually more or less the range where drugs are targeted for in the low nanomolar. And drugs normally act, so it would be logic that the polyaromatics are doing something in your system. So from that sense, I would say that it would be predictable that they should do something, which is good for your technology to validate that it's working. I think that's another question. So it's much more proof that your technology is working than it's relevant in terms of biology, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Just to add to that, that's why it was so important for us in the beginning to choose BKF, because we could see induction of genes, the expression of genes of CYP1A1 and CYP1B1, that showed that the cells were getting the compound there. We don't know how much.
No, that's also, you said the right species, and then my question is, but you had the wrong cells. In the species you have metabolism, and in your organoids you don't have a metabolism system as in a species. But I would leave that out because then we go into metabolism and then it gets more complex. And I agree with you, and I would like to go back to figure 2 on page 152. And actually, apart from having discussions on the data, I think this is an intriguing picture. And intriguing by the fact, why are the polyaromatics activating the transcription of DNA, but not leading to different proteins being expressed, which is extremely weird. And that would also suggest that maybe the gene transcription is related to detoxification processes, or not?
So for this experiment, we did 24 hours, which is quite short. So it could be that wherever was activated in terms of the transcription, then it takes some time for the translation. That I can't tell specifically because I'm not an expert on this field. I was more focused on the microfluidic devices. But the data indeed showed that others, indeed, we had changes in protein. So it was not in terms of the time that was a factor. It could be that what we observed was that the polyaromatic hydrocarbons, they really had an effect on cellular responses to stress, to oxidative stress. So there it could be that there is some kind of specific delay or other processes that don't get
defense
that protein.
Or defense systems to oxidate.
Yeah. So it could be something underlying, some kind of mechanism.
So you would agree that apart from the fact that you used RNA sequencing and not PCR, where you normally use PCR really to look to overexpression or underexpression more precisely, that this picture gives you a lot of information from a molecular structure point of view, and especially the PCBs. I don't know if there are coplanar PCBs in this in terms of molecular structure. And then you can also start to understand why there's so much differences in one group.
Yeah, so, that would be interesting.
Yeah, and then and then also let's say that when in picture of figure 2, 2A and 2B, we see big bars for this 10 micromolar, but then at least you know there is some cell death because you just kill them with a shotgun. Great. I think that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Honing. The opposition will be continued by Professor Den Toonder, Professor of Microsystems and Microfluidics at the Technical University in Eindhoven.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector. Dear candidate, I like your thesis. It's a nice piece of work. You see a nicely staged development of technology, so accumulating for me in this platform at the end. And you show very interesting biological application as well, which has also important medical and clinical aspects to it. And I would like to focus my discussion more on the platform that you present in the final, almost final chapter, chapter 6. You show it in figure 1 of that chapter. In my version, it's page 213. So you have this nice fluidic circuit board with integrated channels. On top of it, you have your modules with your LEGO-inspired clicking system. And actually, I started reading your thesis from the beginning, and then I saw in chapter 2, there is it chapter 2 or chapter? Yeah, chapter 2, figure 6. You actually already envision a platform, maybe a bit similar to what you show here, but with differences, right? For example, I see there electromagnetic coupling. Also in that same chapter, you talk about magnetic coupling. Electromagnetic coupling would be, I think, great because you can switch it on and off, as you mentioned. So what made you end up in the end with the mechanical clicking rather than pursuing further with the magnetic or electromagnetic coupling, which might give you more control, basically, and even enhance the reversibility and ease of use even further?
Yep. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I think it comes back to when I started the thesis to work. So we summarize the different methods and we try to kind of highlight, okay, there is mechanical clamping, there is magnetic clamping, and those were mainly the initial devices that were in the literature. And then there is still not much about automation on this. Mm-hmm. So it's something that engineering can bring in the future, and I hope it does. We already see some of the big players of the field introducing this reversible sealing, including emulate, which is a very good sign. But it's still very preliminary and based on mechanical clamping. So when I did my first research in the state of the art, I determined that magnetic is not that used because of some disadvantages, and mechanical is the main one.
So what are the disadvantages of the magnetic clamping?
So first, you can have a very abrupt. Imagine that. So the magnets is quite cool because you don't need to torque, you don't need to do much. You just have the magnets in the housing, then they clamp. But then to open, it might be that, with the magnetic force that you just...
So is that different from your LEGO system? Because if I do play with LEGO, there is also this, detaching force.
Yeah, but in this case, I'm more referring to the cell culture module. So okay. to close the chip. Okay. And then you have the flow, and that's why you don't want to create this abrupt flow. Right. But indeed, for sure, that can be used for fluidic interconnections. Right. So instead of a mechanical, and mechanical here with the Lego, so to respond to your question, so we decided to go for this because it was one of the main techniques used, and we wanted to further improve this method, with the envision that in the future it could be automated. Okay, good. So let's go a little bit further on this platform. So in several places you talk about standardization, and this is important. You probably are aware that there is a standardization effort going on for microfluidics and also organoid chip. People are looking into this. Did you consider this in the design of your system? Do you comply with these types of, maybe the ISO standard that is active at the moment? I initially saw a document about standards, including, for example, the pitch between inlets and outlets and what would be the dimensions. However, unfortunately, that came a bit late on the design process that I was doing because, especially for this platform, I started the design, so taking the specification requirements based on the Lego dimensions because I wanted to mimic the Lego, which probably now I would have done differently because it was quite difficult to mimic. And is it possible to redesign? Is it relatively easy? To reach the Lego or the standards? No, to reach the, let's say, the microfluidics ISO standards that are now being I think so. Used. At least with the Lego, I would have to be careful because I know dimensions are a bit smaller. And when we use these, normally with these clamp systems, everything gets bigger. So we can't really do like 200 parallelization of 200 channels in parallel. So that would be something tricky, and probably you need to consider different clamps. Okay. So I'm not sure if the Lego there would work. All right. So in terms of scaling, you would have a limit, because I mean you just need real estate basically on your system, right, to achieve it.
But there's also something else, because you, in your presentation, you said we're going to do things without tubes, but I still saw tubes in your system, right? So you have a connection to an external pumping system, I guess, right? Could you get rid of those?
Definitely.
Could you integrate pumping?
We could use micro pumping, although they can have some short lifetime. Depends. I was searching with some suppliers, and the lifetimes were a couple of 1,100 hours, and that was not fit for the purpose. We could use gravity-induced flow, so bidirectional, where we just put on a rocket platform, and it's moving. So there, it's something that could be integrated easily. But I decided to continue with the peristaltic pump. And indeed, there is some steel tubing there, although I consider the domain from the inlet, so before the reservoir until after the microfluidic organoid chip, which for us it was already good to see that we can remove tube from there.
But the user still needs to connect the pump, obviously. Yeah?
Yes,
so,
these really reduce the headaches that we had, for sure, while assembling this.
Okay, so maybe one little question to end with, because I was looking also at the results of this chapter. Interesting. Figure 5, there you show results, and there are some peculiar things. I mean, why does the oxygen decrease? But especially because now we're talking about flow, right, and perfusion, it seems that in this platform you don't see an effect of the flow, is it? Static versus flow conditions do not lead actually to a lot of difference between the two organoid cultures.
In terms of biology? In
terms of biology, because if you look at these, so it's 5I, I think. So if you look at these stains that you see there, I think that all of the so there's not much, because, and in previous chapter you do see a much clearer difference, at least. Huh? So what is your explanation of not having an effect here?
So in terms of morphological differences, in terms of maintaining the structure, so these follicles with the colloid, the lumen inside, both static and the flow, they were able to do that in the mouse, because these are mouse-derived cells in this chapter. In terms of T4, this was at a different time point. It was at 10 days, if I'm correct. Is in imaging T4 here, and that's why at the later stages of our work, we try to quantify with T4 and T3, and maybe that could give a bit of insight on there. But indeed, using this Lego platform, what we determined was that the system was able at least to replicate what the static does, but plus the advantages of having a controllable flow and having, for example, the sensors online. And that was our motto, let's say, for this project, this chapter, because it was more based on the technical terms. But indeed, in biology, I was expecting a bit more to see the T4, but as I said before, the quantification of T4 with the mass spec, it's a valuable, very valuable tool for us to be a bit more confident on assessing the functionality.
Good.
Than just the immunostainings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dentonde. It's now time for our last opponent. It's Dr. Wieringa from Maastricht University.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidates, I'd like to first of all join the committee in congratulating you and your promoter panel for a very nice thesis. Pardon the Lego pun, but it was really nice to see all of the different pieces coming together in this thesis and in a complete picture. I also realized that as I was rereading a very enthralling paragraph on the importance of O-ring design, that I think your target audience was very narrow in some cases, which I'd like to consider myself a part of. And some of the details there I think are actually very critical for those of you who may not appreciate. You've mentioned a few times residence time, for example, with regards to flow rate. I'd just like to read quickly a quote from your actual thesis, so not a proposition. In principle, the more precise the thyroid niche is emulated, the more powerful the model is in predicting drug responses. Now, you've said that you have your residence time, but you've also introduced a competing criteria for your flow, which is shear. And I was just wondering, can you comment on the validity of actually looking at shear within this, keeping in mind sort of the physiological relevance?
Javier Simoponot, thank you. You mean if we took into consideration the shear stress, if it also emulates?
No, you do quite well, actually, I think, in chapter 3. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on the validity of actually thinking about shear, if you think about your physiological system.
Specifically for the thyroid or in general?
For the thyroid.
For the thyroid. I think it's hard to comment on this because unfortunately thyroid is not an organ that is so much studied, I think. So I remember when I tried to see effects of flow, effects of shear stress on the thyroid. Okay, what does the thyroid need so that we can create, as you said, the environment that brings a bit more close to the human body? It was very difficult to get the numbers because there is not much research. For example, I'm not sure. So the only thing here I tried to see was indeed knowing the flow rate, knowing the area to get the shear stress numbers using simulation tools and see if it was very high that would lead to, I don't know, cell death or any effect that we didn't want to. But I consider shear stress neglectable here. If that has an effect, if shear stress should be considered as an important part of thyroid functioning, that's something that indeed should be studied.
Followed up, okay. Because later on, so there was also mentioned a few times that you have different models and different fluid flows already. But I think it's in chapter 5 where you have the same 24-hour exposure at 12 microliters per minute, and then for the longer term exposure, suddenly it goes to 50.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering why?
So what happened is that 24-hour organoid culture is not homogeneous. We actually have a very non-homogeneous culture. So we not only have thyroid there, we have other cell types. And what happens is that we struggled since the beginning to control the overgrowth of other cells. So the more time this model is set in culture, the more we have overgrowth of other cells that are not thyroid. And they consume a lot of nutrients. And that's why when I set the initial experiments, 24 hours, everything was okay. But when I prolong it to, for example, 10 days or even 20 days, the media really started to get yellow. There was not enough media. There was a lot of metabolism going on there. And I think it's connected to the overgrowth of other cells because you can see in the pictures these very big clumps of non-thyroid growing. And that's why I had to increase the flow rate to kind of stimulate a bit the exchange of removal of waste material from the cells and improve the diffusion, let's say, which indeed you can't as well really compare with 24 hours, 10 days because there is some differences, and including as well the media. The media was different as well, was serum-free media, while on the other side was with serum. Yeah.
So you use shear, you use flow rate as your criteria. You then also take a look at the cell metabolic activity as your modulating role there. I was wondering, have you actually looked at what capillary flow is in the human body, assuming that you have small capillaries in your thyroid?
What is the shear stress?
No, what is the flow rate?
The flow rate in the capillaries.
So here I'm going to play my hand a bit because I can prepare for this question.
I don't have the numbers.
So I looked it up, and it's about 1 millimeter per second.
Per second.
Per second.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to your system?
what is the cross-section area of the...
But this is actually not flow. This is actually velocity. Sorry, that's
okay, meter per...
millimeter per second.
Millimeter. I understood milliliter.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
And you said 1 point?
1 millimeter per second.
1 millimeter per second. Yeah, I had to do... I had to divide by the area to get to the number of the speed with the flow rate.
Okay, so it's about 10 times higher than the flow rates that
I set up.
That you're using.
It could be because in the thyroid you have higher concentration of follicles, so you have way more clumped and you have way more concentration of cells than here. So here it depends on the chaplets, but we had 35 microliters of matrix, and we could be 3,000 follicles. And most likely, I believe that in the human body, they are way more compact and less matrix. And so the idea was probably you should normalize with also the number of follicles that you have, because probably they don't need so much nutrients coming like in the body. Yeah.
Daniel Carvalho, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Daniel Carvalho. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Gieselbrecht is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I do.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Daniel José Teixeira Oliveira Carvalho, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Daniel Carvalho, now the short name. Well, it is my great pleasure to be the first to congratulate you on this remarkable achievement and the successful defense of your thesis. Anyone who has gone through this process knows just how much dedication, perseverance, and hard work it takes to reach this milestone. And this is also a very good moment, actually, to take a step back and reflect on the exciting journey we have shared over the past few years. So your supervisory team and yourself working together toward this moment. And your journey began with a highly ambitious European project on endocrine disruptors, initiated and coordinated by Lorenzo. The project, titled Screened, brought together a large consortium of partners from across Europe. In 2019, Lorenzo and I advertised a single vacancy to find 2 PhD candidates who would become part of the UM project team. While Lorenzo sought someone with expertise in biofabrication, I was searching for a candidate with an interest or background in microfluidic bioreactors, as my role in the project focused on developing a modular bioreactor platform. And the official profile stated at that time, candidates for the PhD position in the field of microfluidic bioreactors, PhD 2, should have a master's degree in mechanical engineering, biophysics, biomedical engineering, or a related field, preferably with experience in microfluidics or bioreactor technology. And if I recall correctly, well, you were actually interested in both positions, but were ultimately more drawn to the bioreactor part. And one of the key reasons was your prior experience working with miniaturized bioreactors in a previous project, and if I remember correctly, also related to space applications. And your curiosity to dive deeper into this topic made you actually an excellent fit for the role, and you basically took then the position. The project officially kicked off in 2019, 2020 with this large international consortium. And from the beginning, 2 things stood out to me. First, while you recognize the complexity of the project, you were neither intimidated nor overwhelmed. You approached the challenges with a mix of respect and cautious optimism, though I could sense that you were unsure whether you would be able to tackle all the ambitious goals outlined in the grant application. Second, and perhaps more importantly, I noticed a certain spark in your eyes, a spark that revealed your enthusiasm for taking on challenges. And in those early days, I wasn't entirely sure which side you would lean toward, hesitation, or determination. Also knowing that we had only scratched the surface of the challenges that lay ahead and much more was actually to come. But over time, however, I really saw that this spark in your eyes was not just initial excitement, but a deep intrinsic motivation that remained with you throughout your PhD. Like many PhD students during this period, you faced additional obstacles due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I won't dwell on the difficulties of that time, as we all experienced them in different ways, but I do want to highlight how your ability to organize and work independently, combined with your very strong team spirit, allowed you to remain productive and productive even in this situation. Long delivery times for essential materials tested your patience, but you almost never lost your composure. Instead, you worked together with the team to find solutions, demonstrating both resilience and adaptability. Your ability to work in a team is another defining strength. The collaboration within the UM project team was highly efficient, and I always had the sense that teamwork wasn't just a necessity for you, it was something you genuinely enjoyed. When working alongside Miriam, Nastya, who are both here today, Silvia, Nello, Carlozza, or Gerste, you shared not only the challenges, but also the small victories, celebrating each step forward together. What impressed me most, however, was your unwavering determination to acquire new knowledge and skills. You believe in learning autonomously, and your optimism that you could master anything you set your mind to were truly inspiring. You proved this time and again, becoming proficient in operating the micromilling machine, using Autodesk Inventor for technical drawings, running simulations in COMSOL, writing scientific manuscripts. And you even took the initiative to write a patent during your PhD, developing an innovative one-step method for sealing microfluidic bioreactors. I must admit, I was initially surprised when you expressed your desire to stick to a 9-to-5 schedule, if possible, and avoid working weekends. For a PI, hearing this can be a little concerning sometimes, as we know that scientific research often demands going the extra mile and investing more time and energy than planned to make a real impact. However, in the end, I witnessed your dedication firsthand. Despite your structured approach, you frequently work late nights and weekends when necessary, always ensuring that experiments ran smoothly and deadlines were met. More importantly, your exceptional organizational skills and efficiency allowed you to explore additional ideas while still successfully completing the core objectives of our work packages. Your motivation to deliver high-quality work was also evident in your contribution to scientific literature. So your efforts culminated, for example, in a very nice review article published in one of the field's leading journals, an achievement that not many PhD students can claim. To summarize, Daniel, you have been a highly motivated and collegial PhD student, always positive, always smiling, and always optimistic, even in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. Despite your busy schedule, you were always ready to lend a helping hand to others. Outside the lab, you remained equally engaged with your colleagues and friends, participating in sports competitions, including the rowing contest on the River Maas with Göste. I just recently mentioned that in her defense. Biking, hiking, and of course playing football. And fortunately without any serious injuries, unlike some other of our colleagues. On a final note, sustainability was a guiding principle throughout your PhD. From the beginning, you emphasized your interest in green, resource-efficient solutions, always striving to minimize the environmental footprint of your work. However, I must admit that as a supervisor, I've never witnessed such a sheer scale of material consumption before. And I suspect that Lorenzo, as the project leader and budget holder in the project, may have gained a few extra gray hairs whenever you're requested to buy another kilogram of Matrigel or another 1,000 meters of silicone tubing for the bioreactor. Of course, that's a bit exaggerated, but with all good jokes, there's a grain of truth in that. So with that, I would like to conclude. I would also like to take the opportunity on behalf of the entire supervisory team, together with Lorenzo, to extend our sincere gratitude to the assessment committee, the chair, the pro-rector, and the opponents. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to read the thesis and engage in today's stimulating scientific discussion. I also wish to congratulate Daniel's family, who have traveled a long way to Maastricht, you can be extremely proud of what Daniel has accomplished today. Congratulations once again, Dr. Daniel Carvalho. And with that, I would like to return the floor to the prorector.
Dear Dr. Carvalho, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. I must say I was very intrigued by the title of your thesis, Lock and Play. I didn't know what what I was going to hear today, but you explained very clearly what you did and also the legal blocks that were involved. I think that's also the playground. I'd like to congratulate your family, friends, and colleagues who supported you on this PhD trajectory. I'd like to congratulate the supervisors and thank the members of the degree committee, especially our guests from outside Maastricht, Dr. Albalda Seelen and Professor Den Toonder. Thank you for your contribution to this PhD defense is very much appreciated by Maastricht University. I think it's now time to close this academic session and have a relaxing day.
Thank you.
You give instructions, huh? Can you see the lady opposite? Yes, we have everyone. Yeah. Very good. In the class.